think we're on. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's IPLD weekly sync meeting. It's February the 15th, 2021. And as every week, we go over the stuff that we've worked on the past week or weeks because we haven't had proper meetings for a while, and then the stuff that we will work on. So I start with myself, and I don't have that much to report. Actually, so done. I have nothing really IPLD related. But what I will do is perhaps interesting for some people is that I will work on getting the JS multi-formats stuff into JS IPFS. Yeah, so this is what I want to do till the end of the quarter part-time, and we'll see how this goes. And yeah, just I'm still like last week I haven't had time, but this week I probably will have time, and I'm still in kind of the exploring phase on like how ready it is, where should I start, and yeah, we'll see how this goes. That's all I have. So next on my list is Eric.
Shoot, I'm still typing. So it's been a very chaotic week or so, but there are some PRs up if anyone's interested in reviewing Go code. I've done a bunch of attempts at reworking how linking works in Go IPLD Prime. So that is something that we've had a couple issues open for a very long time saying, this interface doesn't feel good. Can we make it feel good? I think there's now a draft available that actually improves this pretty drastically. The short story is that instead of the link type carrying a ton of logic attached to it, now instead there's a concept called link system, and all of the logic is over here. And it has nice little plugins for how you select the codec and how you select the hasher and stuff like this. And now the link interface is expected to just carry information and contain no logic. I'm hoping that this is going to make a bunch of code a lot clearer and a lot less circular in its connections. It also means that these Go libraries get to move away from strictly depending on some of the stuff in the Go multi-hash libraries, which wasn't a dragon that I intended to slay at the start of this refactor, but it turned out to be so much on the path that I went straight for it anyway. There had been a little bit of a concern with the Go multi-hash libraries before. I actually didn't even realize how big of an issue this was until I started poking it, but where that library had a bunch of hashing functions as direct dependencies. And so if you wanted to add any new multi-hashes and be usable in the Go libraries, you had to patch this library. You couldn't register them yourself. There wasn't a registry concept like that. And also all of its APIs didn't allow streaming, which is just like wrong. So I've been trying to get at fixing that as well as part of this link system rework. So now at some point there's a map that just goes from the multi-codec number to a Golang standard library, completely normal interface of hash.hash. It's much simpler. I also have a PR out for some more multi-hashes. I think most of us in the room have probably seen already, but basically some SHA-2 variants. I picked numbers. There's a PR. I guess there's not much more to say about it. Something that I don't have a ton to say about yet, but would like to think about in the future is I think that it would be really nice to go on a close-a-thon of issues and PRs, anything that's easy and small across the docs and the specs repos. I think there's probably some stuff. I would love to get those to a point where our open issues count is like hopefully darn near none, because I still want to be able to push forward on consolidating a bunch of repos soon. Other people keep asking me questions that I'm answering in one-off ways on GitHub issues and stuff, and like I need to write docs again. So I think that's everything that's been on my mind lately.
Thank you. Next is, things are jumping. Peter.
Yeah, sorry, I put some code on top for discussion that it doesn't look as good as I thought it will. Right, so not much to report IPLD-ish wise, aside from the thing that I have been working on and off for like 2 months now, is an actual library now that hasn't been pushed yet, but I just need to go one more pass on the docs on it. It should appear and be usable relatively soon this week. It has a funny name because it kind of does expect to have a chain attached to it, but actually can be used as a general block store as well. A lot of interesting things were discovered, one of which I want to talk about later today if we have time. And that's pretty much it from me updates wise.
Thank you. Next is Rod.
Okay, yeah, no, mine's very minimal. Been pulled into new things, as I think we all are. But I've been trying to, I really would like to get this spec actors V3 diff stuff done for this specs repo. We've got we described the format of the blocks in spec actors for Filecoin, and we've got version 0, 2, and now 3 is in the process of being rolled out. So Will's already done that work in state diff, and I'm going to do it as well, and then I can, I guess, sanity check his work and help over there. But I just assume it'll be fairly
well. The relevant thing, right, was in state diff, there was no actual change. It was just a duplication because I'm hiding the hamped internals, and that's what you get to deal with, is that it's the hamped internals that change.
Yeah. So I was actually thinking about that. I've been pondering what to do about that, and I think it's time to abstract out the ADLs into a separate section of the docs. That was the goal originally, but it was just too hard to think about how to do it. I think it's time to do that and describe the different formats of the ADLs, and then how they're used, because the problem is that mostly they're used with inline values, and I think in a couple of places there's links, but I want to, because ideally they're ADLs in documentation too, but right now it's like it just describes this is what the block format is when you hit these things, and it's just as if it was just normal. But docs need to have a concept of an ADL as well, and that turns out to be really challenging when you're trying to describe things that are also in line. If they weren't in line, if the values weren't in line, it was just a link, you could say, sort of like you do in state diff, where you just sort of fudge it and you just say there's a thing here and go there and then come back again. But it's just not as easy in documentation to do that.
It's a map.
Yeah, but when we're describing block layout, it's not that easy. But no, you're right. Maybe that's all I need to do, is because originally with ADLs we had this idea of describing the ADL as it's like a map representation, then the ADL name, and we balked on that because of various reasons. But that's the ideal, is to have something like that where you could say you use the map syntax, but say this is actually you find this elsewhere. It's just we don't.
I think from an intuition perspective, it would be super useful to start out by saying you should think of this as a map, and then here's the internals of how we're actually representing that, and go into the detail. Like at a first pass, when someone's trying to understand what's going on, that first bit, which we don't have anywhere, is you should think of this as a key value map or dictionary. Here's how we actually lay it out. It's this weird thing, and here's some documentation on what a hamp is.
I just want to make it crystal clear that this thing is weird. This is not a map. It's a weird thing.
Warning.
And that's why we had the long syntax. It was representation advanced and then the ADL name, and that really makes it clear this is weird. Okay, there's a map, but there's like 3 tokens after it. Maybe I should just go with that and fix it later if it if we get to something better. Anyway, that's me. I don't think I've got anything else meaningful. Just a little bit of maintenance on JavaScript stuff, but yeah, we've got some TypeScript stuff going through the JavaScript changes, and it seems that each one of the TypeScript pull requests to add types also includes breaking changes to each of the libraries that it touches, which is odd. So we have to deal with. I think it comes from people trying to use stuff in new ways and finding that either the interfaces that we're exporting are not optimal, particularly for types, for the older libraries, and for the newer ones, they're finding that the interfaces maybe could be more intuitive for how they want to consume them. And so that's feedback. It's just, yeah. Anyway, that's going on too.
Next is Will.
I guess the main thing that I started on last week with others is trying to get down a set of design docs of what it looks like to upgrade the current Go IPFS code base to make use of Go IPLD prime throughout. Currently, it's using a older Go IPLD format library, and it sure would be nice to not have that happen, and would allow for some better representations of some things. So that is coming together and should end up in a pull request / issue / the world is evolving around me location later this week for broader consumption. And hopefully that translates into then a bunch of people actually making that happen and become a reality, which would be good for Go IPLD prime and for IPFS. Yeah.
Thanks. We have agenda items, but I also remember from last week's Twilight meeting with Chris that you want to talk about Ion a bit. So should we do this first, perhaps?
Sure.
If you'd like to.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think I mentioned this maybe even 2 weeks ago, but I discovered that there is a codec here at AWS called Ion, which when I went through it, it just seemed very thoughtful. They had kind of thought through some of the issues that they had, I guess, designed and addressed some of the issues we've run into, like with JSON and CBOR and whatnot. And I actually am using it for my own medical imaging thing I'm doing here. And actually not because it's AWS, but just because I thought it was, actually I thought it was fun. I wanted to try just, as you see new tech, you like put it to work. And so I did, and it seemed pretty cool. So I've stuck with it. But I think my ideal world would be is that there would be, IPLD would have support for Ion. Well, actually, I'd like to get all your guys' opinion on it if you had a chance to look at it. But it seems like something that might be a good match. And I've worked with, it's kind of interesting because, I guess taking it from a JavaScript point of view, but compared to JavaScript, like with the other IPLD codecs, they kind of return a JavaScript object, and which is nice, but then you run into some issues like what happens if, let's see, I'm trying to remember what it was. Oh yeah, so like a number, right? Like let's say you have a precision issue with an integer, you run into a JSON. That's just kind of, I think, with IPLD today, probably just ignored or not really addressed. So what they do with Ion is like you have to explicitly say, give me like the number or give me a big int version of it. Like you kind of have to like choose. And so it's not as friendly of an interface for a JavaScript developer, but it is more correct because it deals with those things that get lost with JSON and the JavaScript world. So I don't know how that would map to the IPLD interface, because I know these, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like the JavaScript one is intended to be very, that the codecs kind of exposed is intended to be a very like native JavaScript. But if there's some of those issues are with, I guess, JavaScript, and I'm not sure how you'd expose some of those features of Ion. But anyway, so that's what I've been playing with, and I know I asked Michael what he thought about it. He asked me to connect some of the AWS Ion developers with Rod and him. So I did that, but they're hasn't been much dialogue yet. But I don't know, Brian, if you had a chance to look at it, or anyone else has any thoughts or opinions on it. But that's.
I had a look, but it was not an in-depth look. When I saw the number of types, I balked at that. But Michael went further, and Michael's really positive about it. He thinks it looks pretty good, and even raised some internal discussions. And it turns out that it was considered by PL back in, I don't know when they eventually decided to go with DAG with CBOR as a foundation for DAG CBOR. Like ION was a candidate for a better format. So that's really interesting. And I don't know the context of that or why they flipped onto CBOR. Maybe it's to do with the linking type. I don't know how extensible ION is for introducing a linking type. This might be a problem. Yeah, it's positive, and the fact that there's this little JSON variant of it or something, you can represent them nicely in JSON too, and it seems like there's some nice properties of it that we should consider.
Yeah, it actually has two encodings. It has a text format that looks like JSON as well as a binary format. And I think the rationale is that the binary one's efficient, but if you want something that's human readable and like to support prototyping or like to be able to look at without having a tool, it's kind of built in. So I don't know what that would mean from a, I guess, IPLD codec point of view. If you'd support two codecs, one with the text input versus a binary, or just have it auto detect, I don't really know. But yeah, I thought that was interesting.
It'd be two codecs, but this is the reason I want to get DAG JSON finalized for exactly that use case, where you want to be able to see the data, you want to be able to manipulate it manually, and doing that with CBOR is not good. And so having the duality is really nice, and especially when there's bidirectionality between them, where you can exchange one for the other without any problem. And it'd be nice to get DAG JSON closer to that. That's still a mission that I have. It's going to be hard to fit that in unless we our project org structure really helps us to deal with some of these things. I don't know how much you've heard about our reorg, Chris, but
nothing.
We've had a bit of a shuffle, and some of us are not going to be as focused on IPLD as a singular thing.
Well, I heard something about there's maybe not necessarily an IPLD team anymore, or it's voluntary. I'm not really sure, but I'd love to know more, either offline or whatever.
It should mean more people touching IPLD, and it's becoming more integrated, which I think will be the upside of this, particularly IPLD Prime. So possibly the downside will be this group will be less focused on just these efforts, even though I think we're all passionate about these things, and the fact that we will probably keep on showing up to these meetings, even if our work is somewhere else. It's probably an indicator of that.
Well, Michael did also mention something about a broader audience, and I think I'm going to be bringing some AWS folks into this meeting in the near future. So if it better facilitates that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say, for the purpose of the live stream, this is actually kind of like in the air still, and there are all indicators that this particular meeting will continue going forward, at least for the foreseeable future. So yeah, more people joining would be awesome.
Well, I think the desire is to turn this meeting into a much more community meeting. Like, that's rather than just have us doing our sync, but actually inviting people in to talk about their stuff and talk about IPLD in general. So that'd be nice.
So a couple of things that occurred to me while, Chris, you were telling us about ION. Do people pronounce it Eon or Ion, by the way? I've always wanted to pronounce it Eon in my head, but maybe I'm weird.
I have not heard anyone here pronounce it, so I don't know. I just assumed it was Ion.
Fair enough. So the thing you mentioned right at the beginning about how the libraries for it in JavaScript worked, that is probably really interesting to us, because I think at least some people have been talking about if we should try to make JavaScript libraries with a bit more of that vibe. I think Rod and Irakli both come to that thought at various points. And sometimes we've talked about that as making a Prime-like library because it's moving closer to the AST-like sort of headspace that the Go libraries are written around. So seeing examples of how the ION libraries did this could be really interesting, especially if people benchmarked that. I suspect that could be really fascinating, because sometimes when we've had our discussions about this, we haven't done the thing. We haven't made a lot of prototypes of this, so we don't know. But we simultaneously, this discussion, it seems to often raise some confidently shared hypotheses that this will be totally untenable for some performance reason in JavaScript. So if there's any data at all on that comes from people who have like done more of the thing, I would love to look at that. Like, it would be very exciting.
Well, I have implemented, I mean, actually, you're talking about actually using their APIs, like you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I have some exposure to it, but I mean, I can certainly share what I know, but it's not a lot. I mean, I'm going to keep on working with it, so I'll have more in a couple of weeks. But one actually, so yeah, and it really kind of, I would say, threw my head through a bit of a spin when I started running into it, because it was not, I wasn't prepared for it. I was expecting it to just be the JavaScript object, and it's got like layers of stuff and things you have to do to like access the data properly. So yeah, I can share what I know, but give me a couple of weeks of playing with it a bit more, and I can speak more intelligently about it. But one other kind of related thing, which really got me interested, that you guys might want to think about, is that they have this whole philosophy that says you should be able to do like a streaming parse of the data, and then put the stuff that you want that's most interesting near the front of the file, so you can basically do an early terminate and get out, and not have to pay the cost for parsing the entire like structure. And so ION, and because I think they use it internally, who knows for what, but that makes sense, right? If you have 1,000 data items and like 10 of them you need most of the time, and the other ones you rarely need, then you put the 10 at the front and you early terminate, you save yourself compute, storage, or network costs. And I don't know how that applied to IPLD, but I think the principle, I don't know if IPLD will work where you could do like a streaming decode or not, or if it's basically forces you to do full decode of a block and then operate on it. But I thought it was a really interesting principle. I mean, I was kind of excited about it, because actually within medical imaging, we run this case all the time. We have thousands and thousands of attributes, but 99% of the time you just need like 50 of them, right? Like, and so it's nice to put those in the front and order things that way.
I wonder if we should try to, so I think there's a document to be written somewhere in that vicinity that we have not written yet, and is tricky to write because there are some very fundamental trade-offs in that, which any serialization format will eventually rediscover. And I think the inevitable trade-off is streaming write versus streaming read. They almost pull you in, like, I think, explicitly contradictory directions at some point. If you're doing streaming writes, then you cannot do length prefixes, because you can't stream and write.
And focus on streaming reads. They don't seem to, they said that, their use cases, like there's 50 times more reads than writes, or that's what they're optimizing for. So yeah, they do length prefixed attribute writing and all that.
Yep, and that is a choice you can make. Yeah. Other things about ION. Yeah, I don't have the earliest notes of what other people at PL might have thought about this, but I think some of the, if there was a transcoding from this into JSON, that would also be interesting to look at. But I guess you're saying it has a human readable textual representation that looks like JSON, but probably isn't.
I think it's a superset of JSON. So JSON does encode to this format, but then if you want some of those advanced features and other things, I think you use something different, or it wouldn't parse as JSON.
Right. Yeah, so it's basically the same issue as we have when we talk about DAG JSON versus JSON.
For sure.
It's close, but the data model of DAG JSON having two more kinds than regular JSON does, the mapping is necessarily imperfect. So I think if we were to make bridges between the IPLD data model and this ION format, it would be kind of similar. If we wanted to be morphing the ION format into the IPLD data model, because ION has more kinds, we would have to define that morphism somewhat carefully. But otherwise, it should be fairly doable to do that. But yeah, like Rod said, there's just a lot of darn types in ION, like
Timestamp.
blobs versus clobs versus strings versus symbols versus, boy, that's interesting, and I don't mean that in a good way. Yeah, enough said about that. I'm only browsing the specs as we speak too, so.
I think both our stacks now, JavaScript and Go, are in a position where it wouldn't be too hard to make them do the bail early thing with if you didn't match a schema, so not parse the full thing. So we've got a new backend parser for the JavaScript library now that does a sort of a step through parsing that you could insert something like a schema checker into it. So you, or even something else where it's you're reading a block and you can bail early. But I think the IPLD focus on the smaller blocks, like we just don't do massive blocks. I think gives us a leg up there as well. 1 megabyte maximum is not small, but it's certainly not huge.
Great.
All right, should we go on with the agenda items? I've put an item there because we still have this software heritage multi-codec pull request open. And it kind of like is, the discussion dried out. And yeah, so I think we're at the point where we should do something. I question like, well, what should we do next? So I personally would say so I still propose that they're using the Git raw object for all the types except for the, I can't recall which one it was, snapshot or something, for the special type, and have for them registered one special type. So basically you have one special type, and for all the other types they use Git raw. This I still think is what I would prefer, and they seem to be okay with it. So I propose again, I basically repeat what I said on the discussion and say like, this is what I propose, like, would it be okay for you? And then if they say yes, then we merge and we're good.
Go ahead.
I was just going to observe, I think some of the people in that discussion have got some sort of grant or something to work further on this, and they're probably going to test their theories with code at some point. And so I wonder if we can just ask them where that progress is and let them kick us in the shorts when they need a decision, and maybe we can make one at that point with more information. I think the last time I saw any discussion about that, they were saying, yeah, this is an interesting question, but like we can build a prototype without getting hung up on it yet. And so I think maybe if we can let them, it's probably not bad.
It's a good point. So I'm like, also like, we can totally just like ask them like, is this an urgent thing, or is it like, so I just like couldn't it feel so unfinished? Like it's not clear like where this is going, but if we like, I can also like totally say, what's the current state? Is it okay to keep it open? Then we keep it open and I'm totally fine with it. It's more of like, I don't want to basically drag them along and just, although we don't discuss it anymore, and just, I would just ask them. I guess that's,
Yeah, I was going to say I actually didn't say this on the ticket because like I feel like I'll derail it if I chime in. But again, like going back to what we talked about last week, that we might be losing an opportunity here by being stingy on codecs, because the annotation via codec is valuable, because what they are doing is Git, but it's Git that can be interpreted in a certain way. And I don't know, it feels to me that saying, oh, this thing, you know, this new codec, you can treat it also like a Git thing, is cheaper and better long-term than just saying, oh no, this is just like Git, and if you actually need to know that it's something else, you go and, you know, look up in some other register or something like that. But that's my 2 cents. And I guess this is a more fundamental problem. Like, is the codec table just for, you know, for basic decoding, or it is also for identification? And perhaps the maintainer group can, you know, during their upcoming work on IPLD prime, can clarify this, because right now we have no clarity on this, essentially. What is this table for? That's all I have.
One random thought I'll share that's been just floating around in my head is the degree to which I don't care about this is actually just intensified over time. After I looked at some JavaScript code, it was actually Michael's kicking around on the encryption stuff that made me realize that maybe I just don't care so much. Because he had this snippet of code where he just had a bunch of multi-codec numbers, and he assigned them all to the output of some factory function that made a thing and associated it with the number. But like the amount of variation between them in code was like none. And I was like, oh, yeah, we can do that. And so the idea of having a bunch of multi-codec numbers that functionally probably map to the same encode and decode functions, while just being a different number that's persisted in the CID. Yeah, the longer I think about that, the more it just completely doesn't bother me at all. But also became even more.
Not caring like that is the path to entropy, though. This is the big challenge of that. Is okay, so you don't care, so let's just add whatever, and then there's a point along that line where the table becomes entirely meaningless. It's just numbers and strings. It's just a big map.
Well, I mean, that's my initial position, so
right. Then,
also
what business do we have maintaining a global map of things? That's the that's the spectrum you push towards. Of it's just things like okay, let's give the things to someone
numbers,
else.
My friends.
I mean,
we'll keep constructing universes until the end. Yeah.
I mean, wait, we maintain this table for the simplest reason that nobody else is making one. If there was another table that had these rules, we would be totally using it. It just is there because there wasn't one.
Throwing out rules.
The rules are simple. You basically have no taxes, backses, and it's unique IDs. That's it. Nobody has a table like that, even with those two rules.
I mean, if that's all it is, I mean, you're welcome to propose a new README for the thing to say that this is just a global namespace of numbers to strings with certain rules. I have trouble with holding on to something firm there that defines its purpose once you do that. Like, it'd be nice to sort of be able to grasp onto some purpose for it, which is already a challenge given how we mix up codecs and things like the network protocol stuff in there as well. Like it's becoming blurred already. But the thing this discussion pokes on is what we care about, which is codecs. It's a small category of codecs, and these things are claiming to be codecs, and that's our thing. And we are trying to define what it means to be a codec. And there is this space where the codec identifier stops being helpful, and you need something else. And it's that something else we haven't solved for, we haven't given a solution for, and we just say, this is something else that you need to deal with and we can't help you just now. And so either we fudge on the codec and say, oh, you can use it for other things as well, or we push them to solve it in different and better ways, or we come up with solutions for it. And I don't feel that strongly about any of those options, to be honest. And the thing that does make me slightly open to compromise on this is the fact that these codecs are a spectrum anyway, because you can start from raw, and any of these codecs could be raw. Like, they're just bytes, and I can read them as raw. And as you step up, you add layers of meaning. And so we go from raw to DAG-PB, and then you could even go from DAG-PB to you could possibly make a codec that says Unix FS. I mean, we're adding on layers of meaning in different ways, but the thing about the Git one is that they're adding on a layer of meaning whereby their instantiated data, it could potentially have other things in it that are only there because the codec told them that it's there. Like, there's a string in their instantiated data model that tells them their identifier of this data, and that only exists because the codec let them see that through there. And it's like the other example is the binary Merkle, I think we call it, is one of the codecs where it's just it's 64 bytes of two SHA-256s jammed together as a generic binary Merkle, and you can interpret that as two 32-bit hashes squashed together into a 64-byte binary thing, or you can view it through the Bitcoin TX codec, which decodes it the same way, but you see something different. And then you could look at the Zcash TX codec, which is the same thing again, but you see something different in it. So we're already doing these layers of meaning with different bytes. So there is prior art for flexing on this stuff.
So I guess the bottom line to Volker's question is, let's just check with them where they are and unblock them, because this small segue shows me that we're not going to agree on what to do with the table anytime soon.
Well, the other thing that's come up actually is it's come up recently. I think Adine has been pushing on this too. That there's a lot of misunderstanding about our primitives across the board. And people come to us and say, I want this new feature, I want this thing added. And very often it turns out to be they have a misunderstanding of the primitives that we're offering. And we see that in the multi-codec table very frequently, where people say, I want to add this thing. And we do a little bit of correction work with them. And they go, oh, okay, I didn't see that it was supposed to be that thing. And that makes sense. And so initially with this PR, that's what it seemed like to me, because so many other PRs have been like that. But it does seem like they grok it more than a lot of others, and they just have this extra layer of meaning they want to insert. So it is right for us to push back on these things and say, add what you want and use it how you want. But maybe there are times to flex. I don't know. But Volker, +1 to what you said, going and letting them come back to us.
All right. Just one more comment about the primitives are not like well understood across the board. There's also from the research and departments group, there is an RFC, whatever RFC stands for in this case, about some IPLD stuff. And I'm like, all my to-do is to review it, but it's also like it's like half of it is just like, not IPLD, how we talk about IPLD. So it's just like misconceptions about like how IPLD works, and just so just like to bring it up again, like it's something I will review, but it's also like, I agree that there's some misconceptions, or we need to be like clearer, or make sure that IPLD, that the understanding of IPLD is the same across the board as we have as the IPLD team, because there seems to be a huge mismatch between how we talk about IPLD and how other understand IPLD. I will do a first review, and then also let you probably review, and we'll see. But but I don't want to waste anyone's time on it. So, yeah. Anyway, so there's one more agenda item from Peter.
Yeah, this one looks scary, but it's actually really quick. So while writing my thing with the database-based block store, I needed a certain primitive that could do more than block format. This code that I passed is literally its entire method for raw data. And when basically spelunking, making sure that I'm, faithfully reproducing everything, I realized that our current blocks, pretty much everywhere, return just the byte slice as they keep it. There are no copies. So I basically, if I have a block and I get its raw data, I get a slice, which I can then modify at will, and the block will be, something completely different. I can, for example, append to it and things like that, which basically, I mean, not append to it, but prepend stuff to it, which will basically write over what's already in there. I solved this myself with basically having a global, which is always on. But this, I guess, is something to clarify either in docs or in general when you guys are moving to more IPLD prime-ish stuff. What are the ownership rules for all this data? Because right now it's basically like whatever somebody wrote. That's not cool.
That's the whatever face on Eric.
Yep.
No, this is the I really hate the Golang type system face.
No.
I agree that this is a huge problem. It drives me nuts almost every time I open an editor for code. I am desperate for a type system that knows what immutability is, because trying to keep track of this by comments in the code sucks. It's just that. The best I have been able to think of to do is I started making a convention in the Go IPLD Prime comments of saying it is unlawful to mutate the returned value. And that's
which is
kind of just all you can do.
Yeah, which is totally fine. Yeah, which is totally fine. We basically don't say any of this anywhere in our stack right now, is what I'm basically bringing up, that either we should just say that we're going to start copying things, because there might be a good reason to do that in IPLD Prime, in the IPLD Prime world, or we have to basically annotate everything like you cannot touch this.
Yep. I think that we should start annotating everything with it is unlawful to mutate documentation, basically every place that applies, and that should be darn near everywhere. Yeah, I really wish I could think of something more powerful to do than that, but
no, that's fair. I basically want to basically bring up that that right now it's not documented. The other point is, do we even want to go down the path of implementing what I implemented, which is basically that you can make this copy for you at will via global flag or something like that?
I would rather not. The wildest thing that you could do in Go that we could consider is you can use build tags to do something like this. I've seen people make packages. Yes, well, yes, you can. I've seen people make packages for debugging where they use a build tag to, by default, it's going to compile in a debug printf function that is just literally the empty function block, so there's nothing. And then if you use a build tag to enable the alternative mode, it actually puts some debug printfs in there. We could do that for defensive copies everywhere as a build tag. But I was
going to argue that the most important, or the furthest we could go, is using OS memory page protection to have the memory that we give you a pointer to a read-only page.
That's expensive. That's more expensive than just copying it.
I mean, it depends where your data is. If your data is coming from a car that you've mapped in, that whole car could be read-only. Great. now any attempt to mutate any of those pointers actually gives you errors.
Now that's cool.
But for data that you're pulling in from codecs and stuff, that ends up being expensive and not something you can actually get away with, I think.
Yeah, we would have great difficulty offering that feature consistently, I'm afraid. It would be nice, but yeah, there's some related interfaces that kind of perturb me right now. There's some areas around block stores that people have been very tempted to optimize to return zero copy access to data. And so the aim is gotta go fast. And if you're using the IO reader and IO writer interfaces in Go, they aren't super great at mechanical sympathy around read and write block sizes. I kind of tried, but you tend to end up with at least one copy for the byte slice that reader interface is passing around. And so people have proposed patches that let us use some feature detection to say like, oh, if this reader has a method called bytes that gives you a byte slice, then just like cast that interface and then use the thing and then skip all the other copies. Which is kind of cool because it accomplishes the goal of gotta go fast. But it's also a little weird because it completely violates the IO reader contract, basically. And so nobody's made bug reports about that yet, but I'm borderline surprised because it means in practice if somebody hands in a byte buffer, which is a common type to use, the reader cursor won't advance in it. So if you expected that, then this helpful feature about optimization is actually going to do something logically really not correct to you. And I have no solution to this either, other than being moderately perturbed right now. And I'm feeling like the Go type system is really not helping me here. We should probably have some sort of discussion about how we want to do this in our libraries consistently. I agree that would be useful.
Yeah, that's all I wanted just to put on your radar because I know that's exactly the kind of stuff that you are planning around right now. And yeah. Oh, also this interface does not return errors on errors, so I have to return nil and then have a different thing for the error. I hate that, but you know this already.
I look forward to your Postgres library existing.
What were those read-only things called? Because I tried to take notes and forgot the name. So the read-only page.
Memory protection.
Memory protection. Thanks. This was what I was looking for. Okay. Thanks for filling in the gaps. Okay.
MADB is the call. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. Okay. I think we are through the agenda. Is there anything else people want to talk about? We have 5 minutes left. No. Then I close the meeting and thank everyone for attending and see you all again next week. Goodbye, everyone.